Okay, today we are going to be covering Biology Concepts, which is in Module 1 on Canvas. The entire PowerPoint for this module includes fundamental characteristics of life, levels of biological organization, and we are also going to talk about the scientific method. For the fundamental characteristics of life, I want you to focus on describing the 6 characteristics of life that I'm going to cover next. So the first characteristic of life is that all organisms have a highly organized structure. And what I mean by this is that you can start at the level of an atom, which is the basic unit of matter. And then atoms build molecules, which are many atoms bonded together. And in every organism, you can scale out to the next level. Like molecules will eventually make a cell. Many cells will make a tissue. Many tissues make an organ. So every living organism has a highly organized structure. Now remember that organisms can be unicellular, like bacteria, they are one cell, or they can be multicellular, many cells, like animals. Now, obviously, organisms like bacteria do not have organs and organ systems like multicellular organisms do, but they still have this highly organized structure within the cell. Every organism can respond to its environment. Now, I want you to remember that the word organism refers to anything that is living. It's not just animals or multicellular organisms. Organism refers to bacteria, it refers to archaea, which are single-celled organisms that live in very extreme environments. It also refers to plants, fungi, everything that is alive. And so what we are talking about here are the characteristics of an organism, of everything that's living. So everything that is alive can respond to its environment. Now, when you go back and look at this PowerPoint, if you put it into slideshow, you can see this video on a plant that will fold up its leaves when you touch it. You can also click on the link that says the moving plant, Mimosa pudica. Okay, so even plants, believe it or not, can respond to their environment. They can change the position of their leaves regarding the position of the sun. They can retract their leaves when you touch it. Bacteria can respond to the environment. Some bacteria can send out chemical signals, and other bacteria will move towards the original bacterium and form a film, something we call a biofilm. That is what forms like plaque on your teeth. It is a bacterial cell that has signaled other bacterial cells to come and join it. So everything can respond to its environment. Every organism has genes that are coded for in DNA. So even these kittens, they don't really look alike, but they have the same parents. And the genes for coat color, for instance, or eye color, come from those parents. Now, I want you to take a second and think about why all organisms have genes in the form of DNA. So, DNA is the genetic material found in all organisms, and that is because we have a common ancestor. A long time ago, billions of years, the original cell that formed is the common ancestor of all organisms. Okay, and this common ancestor developed DNA to carry genetic information. And DNA was such a great molecule for this that it has remained in organisms throughout evolution. So the existence of DNA in all organisms is evidence that we all come from a common organism. So far, we have talked about the fact that all organisms have a highly organized structure. You can go from an atom and keep getting a broader and broader scale until you come to a cell. And different cells make tissues, different tissues make organs, and so on. Every organism has a highly ordered structure. Every organism can respond to its environment. That is the second characteristic of life. Plants, bacteria, single-celled organisms, they can all respond to their environment. The third characteristic of life is that all organisms have their DNA encoded for in, they have their genes encoded for in DNA. And that is because we come from a common ancestor. Now, the fourth characteristic of life is that all organisms can perform homeostasis. So what is the definition of homeostasis? This was in your reading, so take a minute to think about this. Homeostasis is the maintenance of an internal environment. So homeostasis is the maintenance of a constant internal environment. What I mean by that is, let's take body temperature. All humans should have a body temperature around 98.6. So even if you're out in the snow, your body temperature should still be around 98.6. That is because we have processes that maintain that temperature. So what happens if you get too cold? You start to shiver. Your muscles contract, and that produces heat, which warms your body temperature. If you are too hot, you sweat. Sweat removes heat from the body. That will decrease your temperature in your body to maintain the 98.6. Now, some animals maintain homeostasis by behavioral or physical traits. So you may know that reptiles cannot maintain their internal temperature. So they address this through behavior. They bask in the sun to warm themselves up. When they're too warm, they go in the shade to cool themselves down. And then the polar bear in this picture maintains its body temperature by generating heat and when it's too cold, and reducing heat loss through thick fur and a layer of fat under its skin. The next characteristic of life is that all organisms require chemical energy from food. Okay, all organisms require chemical energy from food. So there are two types of organisms. There are heterotrophs and autotrophs. So actually I'll go with autotrophs first. Oops. So autotrophs generate their own food. Okay, this would be like plants, and I'll put some bacteria. So basically, organisms with a green color can perform photosynthesis. They use sunlight to generate sugar. That is the food that they use to get chemical energy. So when we talk about chemical energy, a lot of times we are talking about sugar. Okay, or I'm sorry, when we talk about food, a lot of times we're talking about sugar. Now, chemical energy is the energy that an organism obtains from molecules, the breaking down of molecules. Okay, so every organism needs sugar and proteins and fats, which are also called lipids. Okay, but sugar is a form of energy that is very rapidly dispersed in the body. So autotrophs are the organisms that make their own food. Auto meaning self. Heterotrophs need to consume food from an outside source. We are heterotrophs. Okay, we consume food from eating plants or animals that eat plants. So every organism must maintain chemical energy from food. The final characteristic of life is that every organism has the ability to adapt. And that every organism could adapt, but more accurately, it's populations of an organism that adapt. So a population is many individuals of the same species in a given area. So remember, an individual organism cannot adapt over its lifetime. A beetle cannot be hatched as a brown beetle and then at some point during its life turn into a green beetle. That's not the way natural selection and adaptations work. If you have a population of mostly brown beetles over many, many, many generations, if green beetles survive better, most of your population will eventually be made up of green beetles. So I urge you to watch this video on the PowerPoint called Animal Wonders. It talks about a variety of animal adaptations. So when we talk about adaptations, we are actually discussing natural selection and evolution. Natural selection is the only process that can lead to evolution in which organisms look like they fit their environment. There are other ways that evolution can occur, but it does not lead, those other methods do not lead to adaptation. Natural selection is the process. Evolution is the result. And natural selection leads to adaptations, which are part of evolution. And we will talk more about this later, but every population of organisms can adapt to their environment. So let's review the 6 characteristics of life that I would like you to know. There are more than 6 characteristics, but we will just go over these 6. Highly organized structure. All organisms are organized from atoms to molecules to cells to tissues, except unicellular organisms. Unicellular means one cell. Although unicellular organisms do not have tissues, organs, and organ systems, they are still highly organized. All organisms have the ability to respond to their environment. This includes plants, bacteria, fungi, everything that is alive can respond to its environment. It can change positions, it can rotate so that it has a certain angle to the sun, etc. All organisms have genes in DNA because we all come from a common ancestor that has or had DNA. And our genes can be passed on from parent to offspring. All organisms can conduct homeostasis, the maintenance of a constant internal environment. As humans, we can maintain a constant internal temperature, around 98.6. Other organisms have to have behavioral or physical modifications to allow them to achieve homeostasis, but all organisms have some way of maintaining a constant internal environment. All organisms need energy, chemical energy from food. Often, food takes the form of sugar. It can also be proteins and fats, or what we call lipids. Now, even bacteria need chemical energy from food. Now, remember, autotrophs make their own food. Anything that is green, like plants, some bacteria, some what are called protists, which are things like algae, anything green can photosynthesize and make its own food. Other organisms are heterotrophs, so we need to consume food from our outside environment. And then finally, all organisms or populations of organisms can adapt to their environment. Over many, many, many generations, organisms seem like they are well suited for their environment.